This is Professor Gavor, and I'd like to cover Chapter 10 of the Wallace book, Ethics, Privacy, and Security. Well, we have covered security pretty well. Mark Ajomo gave a wonderful presentation on it, and so we're going to cover more ethics and privacy here. And it's going to obviously be IT related, but it's going to expand into social media as well. So let's talk about ethics. Let's talk about the challenges, privacy, security, and human behavior. Now, people have freedom of speech. They can say anything they want on Wikipedia. I mean, it's a user-supported encyclopedia that provides information on a wide variety of topics. In most of my papers that I assign in my various courses, I either say no or at most one Wikipedia source. But that doesn't stop you from going to Wikipedia and doing a quick learn about something. The reason I say only 0 or 1 is because Wikipedia cannot always be trusted, even though it's kind of a self-policing thing. What I do like about Wikipedia is there are references in the better prepared articles. So if you go to Wikipedia and you can find references there pretty quick on a subject that you're looking for, and then read those references and see what kind of sources they come from and make your judgment on whether you should use them or not. So there's an ethical dilemma sometimes with using Wikipedia that's right there. Sometimes it's very good, sometimes it's very bad. I would say the quality is 80% there, 70% there. That's just my perception. And you've got to be suspect in the other 30%. When we talk about ethical frameworks, we talk about natural laws and rights. So ethics is a system of moral principles that human beings use to judge right and wrong and to develop rules of conduct. There are ethical things to do, and oftentimes they're in line with the legal thing to do, but not often. Your ethics may hold one to a higher standard than the actual law does. And when we talk about natural laws and rights, well, natural laws and rights are an ethical system that judges the morality of an action based on how well it adheres to broadly accepted rules regardless of the action's actual consequences. Well, yeah, and those natural laws are constantly changing and in a state of flux. Use of profanity in films was considered a censorship, and people held it to a higher standard than they clearly do now, or a different standard. Let's not say it's higher or better or not as good. It's just a different standard than we hold now. There was no nudity in films when films first came onto the marketplace in the 1920s and 30s. Now we have a rating system that kind of gives you a glimpse of what you can and might expect or not expect in a film based on its rating. So those laws are constantly changing. And utilitarianism is an ethical system that judges whether an act is right or wrong by considering the consequences of the action and weighing the positive effects against the harmful ones. Fake news certainly being one of those. What's the positive and negative effects of various news stories? So ethics in the law. We definitely have ethical principles that the law is based on. One of those, I will tell you, is something I learned a long time ago when I was a graduate student, and we're doing, it was a legal course in an industrial engineering master's program. And there we learned that in product liability, that the basic ethical underpinning and assumption in U.S. law is that the manufacturer of an item is responsible for the safety. That's regardless of the idiotic use of that product. For example, consider a lawnmower, a power mower. You could pick up the power mower. It was used to cut the grass. But there are people that thought, well, gee whiz, why buy a hedge trimmer? I've got this beautiful lawnmower. I'm a strong, burly guy. Let me pick up the lawnmower and trim my hedges with it. A perfectly wonderful idea, except for the fact that you've got blades rotating at a very strong, tempered steel blades rotating at a very high rate of speed, and you put your fingers underneath to lift up the lawnmower right where the blades are, and you chop all your fingers off. That actually happens several times. As a result, the manufacturer was sued. It didn't make any common sense, but the underpinning of the law, the ethical presumption in the law was that the manufacturer was responsible. So I think we're having that kind of argument right now in social media. There are political pressures. How influential should Google and Facebook and other, really those are the big two, be in influencing us, in monitoring fake news? Where is the burden of judgment supposed to be? If we consider it a product, we may have to consider that Facebook is responsible for policing fake news. Facebook disagrees. It's like the cigarette companies. Should they be responsible for how people use the products? Gun manufacturers, all these kinds of things. This is extending into IT now. How much information can people have on others? How do they use that information? What is the ethical use of that information? And all of that. So I rooted it in my own background of product liability and things I thought were absurd, but then came to realize that it's just a precept in the legal structure. So there are political pressures, and we see more political pressures in Europe than we do in the United States on holding Facebook and Google to different standards than perhaps we do here. So we're always borderlining that legality and ethics. I mean, you have, you've heard stories about, you can go live on Facebook and do a live video. In fact, several professors, I think, used live video the first week that we went online to determine, to teach their class and deliver their lectures. 99% of the time, it's probably tasteful. In that 1%, it's probably not tasteful. It might be hate rhetoric. It might be even something illegal. People, I think, have shown beating up other people on Facebook. I mean, Facebook quickly takes those down, but it's really hard to police when you have thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of people doing this all simultaneously. So these are all issues that we have to deal with. This is one of my favorite, this is a variation on one of my favorite internet posts I've ever seen. Don't believe everything you read on the internet, Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so it's a U.S. president, and it's a quote. Do we believe it? Well, no, we can't. Abraham Lincoln couldn't have said that because there was no internet when he was alive. But look at the credibility that it has. Has the internet always been around? No. He had passed on, actually assassinated, long before computers were even created. So it's just hammers home the point I think I'm trying to make here. So when we talk about, the ethical issues, we're talking about free speech, decision making, and some of these other new elements that we have talked about. And here's some of the information ethics that we have to do. Intellectual property rights, hacking, plagiarism, parasitic computing, and spam. So what's intellectual property rights? It's more important to protect intellectual property rights due to information than, as or to make the information as widely available as possible? Will the intellectual property creators stop creating if there are fewer incentives? Well, here's an example. Napster, well before you were born, but when my son was in college, it became a music sharing service. And very quickly, people had all the music they could ever get by just simply sharing it. Once you've digitized it and made it an MP3 or MP4, you could share any music with anybody very quickly. What's the incentive for people to therefore create music? I create music for the love of music. I could create a book for the love of writing and something I have to do, but I would certainly consider it my intellectual property and want to get some sort of recognition and or compensation, preferably compensation, if it's widely distributed. And that becomes a huge issue. IP creators have not stopped. They've moved to blogs. They have moved to putting advertisements on their blogs if their blog is popular want and get, maybe that's their source of revenue. Musicians continue to create music because musicians have to play, want to play. And if they're not getting all their salary necessarily from sales online or the use of their music on streaming services like Spotify and whatever the other one is, or Apple Music when it was more popular than it probably is now. But they make their music now. It's the business has changed. They have had to. They're performers, so they put concerts together and then get most of their salary and earnings from the concert tour. But you have to be really good to do that. If you're not really good, you're doing music for music's sake. And like I'm a musician, and I don't make any money from it, but I have it's my favorite hobby of all time. Hacking. Is it ethical to break into a corporate network, not to do harm, but to demonstrate that the company needs better security? I don't know. There's movie plots based on that. Is that an ethical issue or not? Plagiarism. Well, when a person gets an idea from reading another's work and then paraphrases it in a paper without crediting the source or even remembering where it came from, is that plagiarism? Or is it forgetfulness? Yes, it's probably both. I would think that if you read 2 or 3 sources and the same point of view is stated in the 2 or 3 sources, you could assume it's a general point of view. But if you use graphics, well, the graphic, somebody put effort into creating that graphic, whether it's even just a plain photograph or, something they did on their computer or as a work of art. If you use a graphic in a paper, you should probably say where it came from. I have a blog. It's called The Other Side of 50, and I can send a link for the exact article I'm talking about. When I grew up in Detroit, we lived 2 blocks from Cooley High School. Beautiful, beautiful structure of a building, and regarded as one of the better high schools in the Detroit public schools at that time. And in the chaos that has happened to Detroit, the economic demise that it experienced in the 90s and early 2000s, the school closed. It fell into disrepair. And it's really a shame. A grand building that could have been repurposed in almost any place else for a much more, it's just worth preserving. And the school's fallen into disrepair. And I wrote a blog about that, lamenting the demise of this high school. I did not actually go there. I went to Cass Technical High School in Detroit and then moved into the suburbs and finished in a suburban high school. But I used some pictures that I found on the internet in the blog. And I got a rather pointed email from the photographer. Hey, you use my pictures in your blog. You can't just do that. And I wrote him back and I said, I apologize profusely. what do you want me to do? I said, I can take them down. I can offer to pay you some royalty for the use of the picture, or what? And he goes, all I want is that you reference where they came from. I said, done, fair. So I went back, and underneath each picture, I put his name and where the pictures came from. They were on Flickr, and he was happy. So now, whenever I use pictures in my blog, I always put at least where they came from. And I've gotten no other complaints from that. Parasitic computing. Is it ethical to borrow a few CPU cycles from thousands of private computers without owner's consent when they're not being used? What is the purpose? What if the purpose is to do medical research? That's not good. I would think even parasitic use of the internet. I don't have a router in my house, but my neighbor does, and they don't have a password. So I use their Wi-Fi. Is that legal? Is that illegal? Is that right? Is that wrong? Who knows? It's definitely illegal. You shouldn't do it. I mean, to me, it's unethical. I'm not even sure if it's illegal or not. Spam. Is it ethical to harvest millions of email addresses from websites and send them unsolicited commercial messages? Well, it's certainly a nuisance. How about robocalls? One of my mantras in this life, in this world right now, is, gee whiz, what chance do we have of stopping the spread of something like the coronavirus if we can't stop robocalls? Actually, the stopping of robocalls may be a bigger, deeper problem. Okay. Intellectual properties and plagiarism. People that have this create intellectual property have to guard it, and they have to go after people that rip them off without the proper attribution or citing, or if there's compensation to be had using them. I found out when I play a concert, I can play anybody's song. No issues at all. But if I record it, I have to have their permission and or pay them royalties based on what that permission was negotiated. So if I'm an artist of any kind, I would want to the best of my ability, track that. Plagiarism. Is plagiarism good or bad? I don't know. We used to turn it in at North Park when people turned in papers to see how much of the paper was lifted from something else. Even without turning it in, I have my suspicions when I read someone's paper. I read blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden the blah, blah becomes really higher brow, more intellectual blah, 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 blah. And then it goes back to the regular level. And I'm like, I know this person. They don't speak like that. They don't use those kinds of words. So I take the passage in question and put it into Google, and lo and behold, the paper, it was lifted directly from a paper from, Stanford or Duke or Yale or someplace. Well, it's good. If you're going to plagiarize from someone that's really good. But actually, don't plagiarize. Get in the habit of giving credit to wherever you're taking something from. Obviously, if you're going to write a 1,000-word paper, you don't want 900 words of it to be quotes. Because then you didn't really write the paper, you made it a copy-paste exercise. The whole point is to learn something. This is the ethical issue here. And to learn something, you should read lots of other people's sources before you write your own paper. And if someone said something really well and really clever, or you want to use a bona fide authority, a quote from a bona fide authority to really make a good point, well then by all means, quote it, say where it came from. Likewise, if you want to draw a graph or develop a graphic or an image or something, and you don't have the time because you're writing a paper for school and someone else in another paper has exactly the graphic you want to do, like maybe even the Statistica website, which is wonderful. And actually, I just realized I never said where this came from. So I lifted it off the internet. I'm guilty. Don't turn me in. Please. So these are the kinds of things that you want to do with regard to plagiarism. If you use music in a video that you create. Like some of these videos, I was thinking about maybe putting a preamble, like a musical introduction, to have them all look the same. I've not gotten around to learning how to do that on my Mac yet. I don't think it's that hard because people do it all the time, and maybe running some credits at the very end and give it a more professional look, despite the fact that you still got me speaking in this boring monotone in the middle of it. But I would, if I use music, how would I have to give them credit? And so you should be in the habit, I would think, of crediting sources whenever you can. Privacy. Well, yeah, that's an elusive concept too. What is privacy? Is it a right to anonymity? Is it protection from unwanted searches or seizures and searches on the internet and seizing your information? Not searches and seizures like you're driving down the street and the police stop you because you've been profiled somehow. The right to view and correct personal information. The amount of personal information being kept by everyone, and I think they accuse Google and Facebook mostly of this. The right to control use of personal information by third parties. Maybe we need to go to a computing where everybody uses a VPN and blocks all their personal information. The right to be left alone and not badgered with advertising all the time. And protection against intrusion. Well, I don't want my personal information, definitely. The personal information I'd want not being seen or not being accessible are like social security number, bank accounts, passwords, all of those things. But I don't care if they know I'm a white male, about 6 feet tall. They could even know my weight and my SAT score, first of all, as far as I'm concerned. People are very cautious about their health data. I wouldn't mind having my data be part of a national health database. They could have all my statistics, my name and social security number, and that way they wouldn't know who I was. But if that data helps track something and helps stop the progression of certain diseases or draws conclusions on how certain medical conditions, what the probabilities are of someone my age or anybody's age contracting this, and what then the prognosis is for that, I have no issue with that. But other people are really freaky. They don't want that at all. How do we decide this? The internet has evolved quicker than the laws can follow, I think is the point here. So, we have a difference between privacy and the convenience of the internet, wanting to be anonymous or not anonymous and have surveillance. I mean, social media is about not being anonymous. Social media is about, hey, we're all stuck at home, but we made this for dinner tonight. Or I'm a musician and I want to play this song for you to entertain you while we're all stuck at home right now with the coronavirus thing. Or whatever. But we don't want people to use that for nefarious purposes at the same time. I've mentioned in this class several times that one thing that irritates me totally is, it speaks, this is on two levels, is if I go look for something, let's say I go look for, spend a few minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes on a search for a Waterman fountain pen. And then actually buy one on Amazon. Next thing I know, on all my social media, I'm getting advertisements in the sidebar for Waterman fountain pens. That's fine. I mean, I guess I don't mind that so much if I was still looking for them. But if I've actually bought one, you would think that they would know I was searching for it. Wouldn't they know I actually bought one and not bug me about such things? A pet peeve. It just shows that this is not very evolved. So information security. Well, risk management. What information needs protection? And this is a summary of what Mark talked about. What are the major threats from inside or outside the organization? What are the organization's weaknesses, strengths, and vulnerabilities? what would be the impact of that particular risk, and how likely are each of the risks to happen, what controls can be put into place to mitigate the risks. It's like home security. You want to make your house a little bit harder to break into than anybody else's. You want to make the bad guys go to a different house. And they want to make people go to a different house. So by doing that over time, everybody's houses become more secure. And if the robbers, the bad people, are not able to become more clever robbers, you've solved everything. Well, the internet has opened up. You don't have to actually do robbery anymore by face to face. Much like we're teaching remotely, robbery is done remotely as well. I mean, they can put a straw through the internet and suck all of the funds out of your account, and you're aware of it when it's like too late. Or you could be defrauded by some scammy email thing. And it's easy to be defrauded. I remember last year there was a scam that basically it was from the president of the university. It was a scam email that says, "I need to talk to you this afternoon. What's a good time?" I responded to that. "Ooh, the president wants to speak to me." I responded, "I'm available from 3 to 5 p.m. And then realized, oh, darn, it's spammy. Crazy. So, and then because of that, I think North Park IT then put in mandatory phishing training, PHISH training, to determine if emails are of that fishy nature, and how to detect it and how to report it before, if you suspect anything. Well, lo and behold, last week I got an email from the president of the university again saying she wanted to have a phone call with me. And I'm like, oh, man, is this real, or is it just a repeat of what happened last time? So I forwarded the email to the head of IT and said, I don't know if this is real or not real. But I had already responded to it, again, saying I'm available from 9 to 10 this morning. And the president called me, so I knew it was real. But the IT guy said, you're absolutely right to forward it, because if you have any suspicion at all, it's better to forward it than not. So this risk and risk management is something. And how much money do you want to spend on it? How likely is it to occur? It's not unlike when you're looking ahead of time. What is the possibility that we're going to have a global pandemic? Do we want to build all kinds of infrastructure ahead of time to deal with something, and what's the probability of that occurring? If it's only 10%, 5%, 1%, do we want to spend millions and millions of dollars against a 1% risk? Or if it's a 20% chance, maybe spending millions and millions of dollars is a very good thing to do. And if you talked about a global pandemic, think about this. How do you know that it's going to be a respiratory pandemic versus some other kind of pandemic? Okay, if it's respiratory, you need ventilators. If it's not respiratory and you're holding a lot of ventilators that you could have spent on, I don't know, and it ends up being a blood-related pandemic of some sort, and you need some other device, but excuse me, I'm not well versed in the medical field, and you've got a mess of ventilators, but nothing to solve the problem that now is at your doorstep, you're going to feel foolish. So there's all these considerations. So, and I think I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because Mark Ojomo did a beautiful job in presenting this and assessing variability. Well, this is something I can actually speak on. If you talk about vulnerability, this is like a failure modes and effects analysis, which they call FEMA, FMEA. And it came from the airline industry. And basically, if you're designing a new airplane, you want to say, what are all the possible things that could go wrong? You list every one of them. You end up with a list of not hundreds, but thousands of things that could go wrong on an airplane. Every little part, every little subsystem, every little weather condition, this, that, the other thing. You list them all down. Then you ask the question, what is the likelihood of this happening? basically high, medium, low, because you don't really know the likelihood of it happening. What is the severity if this occurs? High, medium, low. Now, everything that's high, high, or high, medium, or medium, high, you probably want to address to some degree. Definitely the high highs. If it's a high probability of occurrence and a high severity, let's address it immediately. The next tier you want to address are medium risk, medium probability of occurrence, and high severity if it occurs, or high probability of occurrence and medium severity upon occurrence. That would be your second tier that you want to address. And then the last tier, the low lows, you probably never address because you're so busy trying to mitigate the others. So that's called a failure mode and effects analysis. This is something like that. What's the vulnerability? Is there a leak of confidential data? Is there a loss integrity or reputation? Would it make the systems unavailable? Is there financial risk involved, and the likelihood that the event will happen, and the total impact of this activity? Now, I imagine they seem to be on a 1 to 10 scale. I'm not a big fan of 10 scales. I like 5 scales because you have low, medium, high likelihood of this happening, and then you have an in-between. And really, I think if you have lots of these vulnerabilities, maybe even going down to a scale of 3 is enough for the first time around. And then you can weight these averages. Here, I don't know how they've done it. They have 10, 11, 17. So if you divide 17 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it should be 3 point something or other. They've gotten 4 here. I don't know if they've weighted these. You could weight these and do a weighted average, or you could just do an average of all of them together. That's why I like the simplicity of the failure mode and effects analysis. Probability of occurrence, severity of the impact if it does occur. But something like that is what you need to do to come up with a game plan of what to do. Administrative security controls. I mean, this is almost like a problem solving in quality management. Identify the threat, contain the damage, determine the cause, recover the system, evaluate the lessons learned, eliminate the cause, or eliminate the threat is then also what you want to do. Technical security controls, authentication strategies. Well, gee whiz, every time I log on to email or Canvas, I've got to use this double authentication. Right now on my phone, if I log on from a computer, it sends me something to the MS Authenticator, and I have to say allow, don't allow. So it's actually very good. If I don't have my phone in my hand, if I leave my phone at home, I don't know if I'll be able to log onto my system if I get to work. So it's a good reminder to have my phone with me all the time. You can encrypt data. You can try to have intrusion prevention. If you encrypt the data, I mean, this is what ransomware is all about, right? They'll come in and just encrypt your data. And the code the encryption code, these are based on like really large prime numbers often. And they're really hard to break into. They're, the way Apple does their encryption, you've seen some of the news on that. When there's a crime committed, and the federal government wants to get into their iPhone, and Apple's reluctant to provide them with any ability to break into their phone and read their encryption. And the best minds in the federal government, be it the FBI or the CIA, can't actually do it as far as I know, and as far as any news reporting knows. So that is something else. The authentication, the dual authentication is probably a good thing. And then, information security and cloud computing. What are the standards and best practices for this? I mean, right now, everybody in the world is working remotely from home. Are they outside the firewall? Yeah, they're probably all using cloud-based systems to communicate with their internet. So how do you encrypt that? How do you make sure that this is an issue that's probably going to be huge going forward because of this COVID-19 thing that we're in? And the human element. Oh, gee whiz. We've talked about passwords, for example. How do you, I got a password, I use the same password for everything. Well, everybody's advised against that. You could use, if you're only on Apple devices, you could use an Apple generated password, which then it will store for you. And the nice thing is, if you have an Apple phone and computer, that's all synced between the two. And I think you can sync them between different kinds of devices, not as easily. So they're saying avoid real words, avoid, mix different character types, lowercase, uppercase, special characters, reduce the cognitive load of memorizing the password, create passphrases and meaningful chunks, and use the first letter of each word. I love whitewater rafting, done it 15 times. I love whitewater, ILWWRDI15T. Okay, I guess that would work. It wouldn't have to work for me. I don't love whitewater rafting. And then, guess what? Even if you come up with something clever like that, and you don't use the website often, you come back months later, where is it? So use different passwords for each login that you want to secure, so loss of one does not compromise the other. Change your passwords every few months as required by the application. North Park forces me to change my password every year. And there's actually a ceremony I go through. I try to figure out what password to use, and I have a scheme that so far seems okay. I don't think anybody could guess the scheme that I actually use, but then how many people are trying to hack into my stuff? Social engineering and security awareness. Well, when we talk about social engineering, that's an important thing to talk about. How do people behave? And I ignored the cognitive aspect on the last slide. So we want to be cognizant of the fact that we're not being taken advantage of. We want to be aware of security, and we want to make sure that we're using systems that are engineered to reduce the risk of people being duped by this. They say, oh, check your email to see if the email address that you're getting is not a phishing email, if it smells at all funny. Report it, look for misspellings, look for the email address it's coming from. If it's a weird email address, maybe you want to ignore it. If they're asking you to do something that they have no way of knowing that you have any capability to do that, or don't do that, don't ignore it. So those are all important things. So we've got to, we require an ethical business ethics course. It's taught by the philosophy department. And I think everybody that takes it finds it's kind of interesting. And the spin on that is always looking at positive ethics. I think my background in quality management is I'm always talking about ethical things too, but I'm looking at it from negative examples of such. I think here's the kind of things we're talking about here. You've got to decide how do you deal with, what information should a sales rep have and not have? How do you deal with when you're dealing with a sixth grader? Right now, when I'm putting these videos up, and I put them all on YouTube, as you've noticed, YouTube asks me a question every time I post a video. Is the intended audience children? And they have higher uh, bars to jump over and hoops to jump through for things that are aimed at children. Um, what is my ethical decision making for a university employee? When they are out there looking for possible recruits and they get an offer to, here, we can give you 1,000 students that may enjoy your university, and it might be information that was hacked. Do you share that? Do you not share that? How about with coworkers? Um, you know, People are really, really crazy about not sharing their financial information or what they make. Um, why is that? Because what people make, there's still differences in uh, race and sex and salary and time and service. It should be, I think we try to make it as transparent as possible. I mean, I can guess based on the kind of job someone has, the kind of organization they work at, and their position and time and service. I probably can make a reasonable guesstimate of their salary. I don't know the exact one. I would say if I'm worrying about North Park, it's even more predictable because, one, we don't pay a lot, and there's not a lot of wiggle room in that formula. And then the CFO knows all kinds of information about everyone in the company because they have access, probably privy to more data than anybody else. What are the things they have to do? And I've noticed that most CFOs that I've dealt with and come across, or people in the accounting departments that deal with things, take that very seriously. So we talked about some ethics challenges, privacy, security, human behaviors. I'll try to come up with some interesting discussion that we can have in this regard uh, so that you can explore this more, and I'll try to have some other readings to look at. Thank you very much, and there's only 2 more chapters in this book, so look forward to speaking on those.